Welcome to Doc NYC Spring Showcase. We have the lovely team here today from Let Me Be Me, our co-directors Dan Crane and Katie Tabor, of course, the Westphal family, Kyle Westphal and Jenifer Westphal. How's everybody doing?
Good.
Good.
Excited to chat with you guys. I really would love to go back to the beginning. Well, not all the way to the beginning, but the beginning, I guess, of this filmmaking journey. Dan and Katie, like, how did you guys come to connect with the Westfalls? And after you guys answer, we'll love for Kyle and Jen, your feelings about someone approaching you and making a movie about your life and that experience.
Well, I will kick off. Jen and I may have a little back and forth here potentially, but this film actually had maybe a little bit different than a typical order. Jen and the Westfalls had done a short film, and actually sort of even a previous short film. There had been a couple iterations kind of looking at this material. I think Jen always felt that there was something important in the story of their family, and in her mind was kind of working out as well, like what was the best way to tell this story. So there was an existing about 40 or 45-minute film that that Jen had, and I sort of connected with Jen at that point, and she knew that there was sort of something more she felt could be told, and I was very interested in that as well. One of the things that was extremely compelling to me in the footage that she showed me was all of the archival footage downstairs in the playroom, which I find to just be some of the most compelling footage I've ever seen in my life. It's incredibly unique, and it spoke to me of something that I am kind of always after in my filmmaking, which is, how can we lead more intentional lives? How can we have more intentional relationships in our parenting and all our relationships? So I saw that footage, and it just, it hit me right in the heart with, and I knew I wanted to get involved. We didn't necessarily know exactly what the next steps were, but my instinct was that we needed the family story in there more as well. So at that point, the story focused on Kyle's journey through fashion school and intercut with some of the basement playroom footage. I came in and suggested that we go much deeper on the family stories. And it took a little time, I think, for the family, Jen and all the rest of them to decide, whether they wanted to go that route or not. And I'll kind of let Jen take it from here, but that was some of the initial conversations between Jen and I.
Do you want me to?
Yeah.
So
I would love. Go ahead.
yeah. So great. Well, that's Katie, exactly. So we had so this kind of started because we had this story of Kyle's journey, and we weren't really ever clear as to what would be the best way. Write a book, go a speaking tour, and then came across the idea of a documentary film. And so we started filming Kyle in his senior year at Drexel just to see what would happen. And Drexel, their fashion school was fantastic in terms of giving us access to him while he was in school, as you saw from the film. And so so as Katie said, we kind of came about it in a different way. We were just playing around with it to see what would happen. And then we did have a couple iterations of Kyle's story. And then I had always, I'm a filmmaker, and so I didn't want to be in the film. There was no way. And so I really put my foot down for a long time until Katie really came along, and she was the one that said, we really need the family story. So she was the one that did that.
As a filmmaker, this is probably a unique experience for you. I feel like a lot of people don't go through that as filmmakers, to say that, hey, now I'm going to share my life story. Was there any, you have the archival, was there any reticence with it, or were there things in there you're like, let's not share this, or let's keep this? Because watching the film, you guys are also very open, the group of you, every single person in the family. Curious about that.
Yeah, I had a lot of people say to me, don't do this. This is a very bad idea. But I just felt like Kyle's story was so full of hope and understanding the communities of not only autism, but mental health in general. There just feels like there's a need for hope. And so I thought Kyle is just such a wonderful guy, and he's got this very unique story that's not unusual to a lot of people's story. So I felt that, him telling it would be the best way. So and it was a 7-year journey, this film. So, as a lot of, I think, really important docs, it takes time for the story to really kind of unfold, and you need iterations of it to kind of understand what's working, what's not working. So as a filmmaker, there were many different hats I had to wear. But this film in particular, I felt a real need to make sure we got the story, not only told well, but told in the most truthful way possible. So.
And Kyle, I mean, your senior year of, I imagine, very intense, like fashion design, and now everyone wants to follow you around with a camera and ask you a bunch of questions. What was that experience like for you?
No, that's a really good question. It's interesting. I think, it was a very intense environment. But I think Drexel did a really good job of always trying to bring everyone together and really, everyone is sort of on their unique journey. And so I think what was really cool is they did such a great job of, trying to really keep the peace and really keep the balance. And so it really, because, it's all like Project Runway, it can get intense, and, people's feelings are involved, and, it can get a bit competitive. But I think, you stay true to who you are, you stay true to who you want to be, and you just put your best self out there, and that's all you can do. And overall, I think it turned out great, and it was a really good experience, that slice of time.
I feel like everyone, well, specifically Katie and Jen, mentioned about how important it is to tell the story right. Has there been particular reaction with other families? Has anyone like reached out to you guys and had particular things to say or thoughts? I'm really interested in hearing that.
Well, I think the second part of the film is Katie was really she was filmmaker, director, therapist, so I think the thing that is key to your question, Brandon, is the fact that the Katie's interviews with all of us, including my other son Jake and his sister Annie, my daughter Annie, was the first time we ever talked about this story.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's the first time we really answered any questions as to how it was for us, our experience, which is, I know it seems odd, but that was truly it. When Kyle graduated from his program, and you saw in the film, we were like, okay, Kyle's, let's go. Kyle's out there. And we just never looked back. So the thing that was really important with that whole piece is Katie got those interviews, and that was really extraordinary, I think, and really elevated the film. And then Dan came along as writer and co-director to finish the whole story as you talked about, in the right way. So I think that we've had very little pushback from families, because I do think we told it in such a truthful way that I would say the majority of the families can really relate to how authentic and truthful we were about our experiences. Jake, Annie, Jeff, myself, and Kyle.
Yeah.
What Katie and Dan were able to capture was a film that really speaks to multiple different people in different ways. And I think that's the power of the film, is the capacity for everyone to find a little bit of themselves in that story.
Very well said. I mean, as filmmakers, all of you as filmmakers, I'm curious about the Sunrise program itself, and how did you guys want to show that process and building it out? I just thought it was very detailed, and in a way that, like, you explained all the conversation around it and how that would go about. Was there initial plans for that? How did you craft that? And just, I don't know if there was required access. Do you have to talk to them? Like, all these things about that particular part of it.
Well, I mean, Jen, you can probably speak to, in whether you had to get permission from them in terms of telling their story. But I think one thing that I really tried to do when I came on board was give a broad context for the types of treatments that were happening at that time, and show that Sunrise was just this kind of fringe option that not a lot of people had heard of at the time, and but also try to not I was very conscious of trying to not make it feel like it was a commercial for Sunrise. Like, that's not the intent of the film. It's not intending to be a promotion of that specific program. And one of the interviews that we conducted with Dr. Andrew, I can never say his last name, Shane. Yeah.
Shahan, yeah.
Yeah, Shannon. I think he gave us a good perspective on, it has a lot of benefits, but there are also downsides to it, in terms of how much commitment it is, and what happens when the kids leave the program and they're not always ready for the real world once they, after they leave the confines of the room. So, yeah, I think that was the kind of balance that we were trying to achieve. But Jen, I don't know if you want to speak to how Sunrise reacted to it, or what were they involved or anything like that.
Well, it's a in the autism community, it's an exceptional debate about what is the right program for these kids, and the concept of we talk about it in the film. Can you cure a kid of autism, or what does it matter, kind of thing. That's why I say what I say at the end. But for the Sunrise program in particular, it has a very mixed support out there. And so it was very a balancing act between both Katie and Dan when we were trying to figure out how to bring them into the story, because the fact of the matter is we did a Sunrise program. I mean, we did it the way that they had set it up. I didn't know about any other programs, because the Sunrise program fit so well into the model of our home and what we were doing for our daughter, who was older than Kyle already. So a parent-led, child-centered, home-based program really, spoke to us. So it wasn't like we were out there looking for other things. We had just sort of accidentally figured out he was autistic to begin with. So it's the truth of the story is we did a Sunrise program. So we didn't want to shy away from it, but we also didn't want to say, as Dan said, and Katie and we had lots of debates, make it a commercial for Sunrise. Now, Sunrise would have loved if we'd made it a commercial about them, but that obviously wasn't the point of the story. So, so they're fine with the film, but they would have liked it to be a bit more about them. So it's all good.
It's kind of a two-parter, and you can answer this however you like. This is more for Kyle and Jen. You mentioned, Jen, that you guys hadn't talked about it with the entirety of the family. I'm curious, has this changed your relationships at all? Was it great to get this out? And Kyle, really, your relationship with your siblings, what's it like seeing them talk about their experience? Has anything changed between you all since the film? I'm curious about that, and has it been just revealing to have those relationships and their feelings revealed to you all on screen?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think for me, I think it's always fun to kind of see what your siblings say about you. I think it's always, I think all of us always want to know, oh, what do they really think? And so I think being able to see that was kind of fun. It's kind of kind of like the play of what would happen if people came to your funeral? If you could see that, what would that be like? And so I think it was kind of a fun play on that, and it was a fun I think it was great. I think they said everything I thought they would say. They said even more than I thought. And it was just such a great, it brought us closer together. I think it really sort of solidified us as a family. And I think it was cool for all of us to really tell our story, including my siblings. And that was really cool because I had done stuff before just sort of telling my own story, but it was cool to kind of see this really as a family journey. And that was really cool. Yeah, as well as giving my own perspective as well.
Yeah, I think it's such a good point. And I would just say that we as a family are kind of like this anyway.
Mhm.
You know, Kyle always laughs at me. He's like, Mom, we really should have just done it as a reality show because
Mhm.
we're like this, right? So it was not shocking to me what the kids said in their interviews. In fact, I was really proud of them for being so honest, because it's not like they haven't said stuff like that before. So we're all kind of that, we banter a lot as a family. So again, sometimes some feedback we've gotten on the film is maybe we didn't have enough deep emotional a piece to the whole film, like, you know, a lot of upset or a lot of a lot more upset, let's say. But that's just not how we were as a family. We didn't really, whether for better or for worse, people could come in and say this or that, but we just really, this is just who we were. And you know, Kyle is Kyle, Jake is Jake, Annie's Annie. You know, we kind of have that rapport. So it was, as Kyle said, it was actually very entertaining. So it was very entertaining.
Talked about archival a bit. This is more about the ephemera side of that. Um, there's a thread in the film where you're talking about, oh, well, I mean, why don't we realize, you know, about Kyle's interest in fashion and everything from Cinderella and all the things and the cloth and all these things over time. And there's so many drawings and the dresses and things over time and the sketches and like, what was it like going through all that stuff? Kyle, were there any like huge things you're like, well, we can't show that. That's gonna be my, you know, next line coming out lately. You know, it's like these things going through all that stuff. What was that process like? Was it surprising that you kept it all? And what was it like actually getting that in the film? And how do you guys want to incorporate that?
No, that's a great question. You know, it's interesting. I think there's some stuff where it's like, especially, not only just the sketches and things, but just, some archival in the film that you're like, oh yeah, that did happen. That was on archive. Great. And it's kind of like, you see the best and worst of your middle school experience on camera, and you just kind of, but at the end of the day, it helps someone. So you're kind of like, okay, we're just gonna roll with it because like, yes, it's kind of, some people consider it to be embarrassing, but you're like, you know what? It's all about the experience. It's all about, helping someone else. And it's all about, and, sometimes it's fun to look back in your experience and, laugh with yourself rather than laughing at yourself. And so it's all in good fun and it's all in good humor. And as in terms for the sketches, looking back on it, it was really fun to it was fun to reminisce about all the stuff that I did as a kid, all the sketches, where that was from, etc. It was a blast. It was fun to sort of look back.
Awesome. Katie, Dan, Kyle's visual world building, obviously evidenced by this animation process. It's a big filmmaking choice. I'm sure Jen, you have thoughts on that as well. I'm just curious how you guys decided to pull that together. The studio that you use. I don't know if Kyle, you were involved at all in like the choices that were made. All of those visuals are very amazing and evocative. So curious about the scripting process as to why did you choose certain elements to build that out, and why did you want certain areas of the story to be told that way, and then also just the visual choice.
Well, I guess I'll answer that. I think the animation sort of, like the film itself, had many different iterations. I think there was sort of a set of animations that had been done that I think mainly were to kind of cover pieces of archive that didn't exist. Like as Jen said, you know, it's not like when your kid is crying, you go and film that, you know, or if someone's upset, you go film that, you know. So there were things that were part of the family that they just didn't have footage for. And so I think that was kind of the initial motivation for doing the animation. And then um, I I kind of shopped around for a few different animation companies, and I was really looking for someone to do. I w- I had a few different goals. One was to get a company that could do um, kind of like sort of a stop motion style that was very immersive, and it would give you a sense of of being in Kyle's world, and I wanted everything to be sort of fabricy in that world because that was his kind of mode of communication. And so I just researched companies online. I found this uh, animation company called Yuck Fu in New Zealand. Well, they're in New Zealand and Australia, and a few different companies did pitches, and they just knocked it out of the park and like really got it, and came up with a lot of inventive ideas, like, you know, pouring the orange juice became sequins as it poured, and just trying to like really go for it with the idea of everything is fabric and everything is tactile, and that, to me, that was kind of a way to get you into, you know, young Kyle's, well, and older Kyle's headspace, really. Um, and yeah, I was very happy with how they turned
Just
out.
to add to that a little bit, as far as kind of the early process on it, there was definitely jumping off points related to, as Dan said, what we might need to cover. But I would say, that was one of the seeds. But then there was also once I sort of conceptually started to think about this plant boy idea, which of course jumped off from the greenhouse discussion, right? So one of the therapists starts to talk about this greenhouse. And I think for myself and the editor at that time, there's just a seed that started, metaphorically, a little seed that started to get planted about this idea of this growing boy and what it meant to be a boy growing in a greenhouse, right? So there was a point in that early process that became, a really important metaphor for us, and that animation was going to be sort of the best jumping off point for that. So just kind of, that was also another one of the sort of stakes in the ground around that choice for storytelling.
Yeah, and that's a great point, and I'll even add more, Katie. So when we started the animation process idea, because as Dan mentioned, there was just footage we just didn't have, right? So the being able to explain the walking the runway and how immersive it would be, that was for Kyle. Um, you know, we started out as the plant boy, but Kyle was younger then. So the idea of the story was more animation that was more childlike and told the story. Whereas we moved along with the film, and it got, reiterations and started working, we realized we needed more sophisticated animation. And as Dan found, the fabric immersion kind of thing came along. So it was all great. The first iteration with the animation that we started with was fantastic. And then as we moved along with the storytelling and rewrote some parts of the film, this other animation came along. So it was it's not your usual, as we started talking about, usual process, because the other thing too is we had the budget to be able to play with this kind of thing. Not all filmmakers and not all films get that opportunity. So it was fortunate that we had the budget to be able to say, parts of this doesn't work, so let's move in a different direction. And the budget constraints weren't there, so it was good.
I don't know if this is an addendum, but Kyle, did you have any thoughts on that style? Were you able to give some 2 cents here and there and your input?
It's interesting. I really just stayed true to my role as a subject, and I really, try to let the, rest of the team handle all of that. And I just, I stayed true to, my voice, the story that I could, the story that I wanted to tell, the story that was true, that was there, and really sort of give my experience and really stick to that.
Awesome. You mentioned earlier, Jen, just about with Sunrise and the autism community and what people think about that, and then what should you do here or there. But at this film in particular, how has it been received in the like, greater community? Has it been like a teaching tool? What have people been saying? How's the reaction been broadly?
Yeah, I think, I think, oof, that's such a loaded question. I think it is, again, I think it's a film that resonates with a lot of families and a lot of parents. In terms of their family and how the family dynamics of having a child with autism and running certain programs for them and that kind of thing, and how that plays into the life. And you saw in some of our family footage that the various complicated pieces to it. Kyle wants out of the room. My younger son Jake's already having his birthday parties. Kyle wants into that. So there's a lot of realness in terms of what the footage we showed. And I think that's really the point of the film, is to really have the families have the opportunity to experience what we experience, or have a connection with what they're experiencing versus what we're experiencing in that vein. And it's extraordinary. A lot of people have come to me and said, this film has given me such hope. I have a nephew with autism who's 7, and now I can see the possibilities. That's been the most important thing for me. Whether or not the autism community grabs a hold of the film is what it's going to be. But for us, the reactions of the specific and people and families has been very, very important.
Yeah, just jumping off of that, it's interesting because I've noticed that every time I do a screening or a Q&A, it always something different and unique happens. And that's been a really cool aspect of the film, is just going out there and just kind of getting people's reactions. And so, actually on Tuesday, I was just at a special needs school, and we actually had a really great reaction to it. I wasn't sure going in, but it was really, I think people were really wanting to ask questions, really wanting to engage, and really wanting to learn more. And I think that's what's really cool and actually what's really cool is that individuals who are on the spectrum themselves really, that's where we've had some amazing impact with this film, is really, and actually both screenings where we've had this happen, where both individuals on the spectrum really actually during the Q&A made that entire experience. So we've had some really fantastic individuals say that this relates to their experience, and that this is a reality, and that was really, really cool.
Beautiful. Very well said. I want to thank you guys all for sharing with us. Jen, Kyle, Katie, Dan. It's been a pleasure. Let me be me. An amazingly awesome film. Thanks for joining Spring Showcase.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Brandon.
you.